People always say that planning a wedding shows you who's really on your side. I didn't fully understand what that meant until the very first day I went wedding dress shopping. I remember being nervous but excited, the kind of excitement that makes your hands shake just a little. This was supposed to be my moment. After trying on what felt like 100 dresses, I finally found it. The one that made me tear up the second I looked in the mirror. It hugged me perfectly, sparkled just enough without being over the top, and made me feel beautiful in a way I hadn't felt before. I paid more than I originally planned, but I didn't care. This dress felt like the start of my future. When I showed pictures to my fiancé, Brian, he was speechless in the best way. He told me he couldn't wait to see me walk down the aisle. I thought everything was perfect. That illusion didn't last long. A few days later, Brian's mom came over while we were discussing wedding details. I showed her a photo of the dress, expecting maybe a polite compliment. Instead, she squinted at the screen and said, half laughing, "Huh, I wonder if that would still fit me." I laughed awkwardly, assuming it was a joke. "Definitely not trying it on," I said, still smiling. She didn't smile back. "Well, why not? Just to see," she replied. I tried to keep it light. "It's already tailored, and it's really delicate." Her face changed instantly. She sighed dramatically and said, "You know, I never even got to have a real wedding. I just think it would be nice to feel like a bride for once." That comment hit a nerve. Without thinking, I replied, "You did have a chance. You just cheated on your fiancé." The room went silent. I knew I crossed a line. I regretted it immediately. But instead of talking it through, she burst into tears, loud, theatrical sobs. Brian rushed to comfort her, shooting me a look that made my stomach drop. She left shortly after, claiming she needed space. That should have been the end of it. The next day, she showed up at our place unexpectedly, saying she wanted to talk things out. I agreed, hoping we could clear the air. First, it seemed calm. She apologized vaguely, not for what she said, but for things being misunderstood. Then she excused herself to use the bathroom. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. First I thought nothing of it. But then I noticed how quiet the apartment was. No running water. No footsteps. Something felt off. I walked down the hallway and stopped when I heard a strange sound coming from my bedroom. Heavy breathing, fabric stretching, faint grunts. My heart started racing. I pushed the door open. And my world froze. Brian's mother was standing in the middle of my bedroom, halfway inside my wedding dress. The seams were pulled tight. The zipper on the side was completely undone. She was tugging, twisting, forcing herself into a dress that clearly wasn't made for her body. I screamed her name. At that exact moment, I heard a loud ripping sound. The zipper burst open completely, tearing the sheer backing of the dress. The fabric sagged. The beadwork snapped loose and fell to the floor like shattered glass. Felt dizzy. Thousands of dollars. Months of anticipation. My dream dress, destroyed. "What have you done?" I shouted, my voice shaking. She looked at me in the mirror and said calmly, "Relax. Dresses can be fixed." I couldn't breathe. My hands were trembling as I stared at the damage. This wasn't a small tear. This wasn't something you could just sew back together. I had explicitly told her not to touch it. And yet here we were. She stepped out of the dress like nothing happened, repeating the same excuse she'd used before. I just wanted to see if it still fit me. I wanted to feel like a bride. That was when I realized this wasn't about curiosity. This was about control. And this was only the beginning. I thought destroying my wedding dress would finally make Brian stand up for me. But what he did next made everything so much worse. I stood there staring at my wedding dress lying in a heap on the floor, torn, stretched, and completely ruined. My chest felt tight, like someone had pressed all the air out of my lungs. I couldn't stop shaking. This wasn't just fabric. This was months of planning, anticipation, and a piece of the future I had imagined so clearly. Brian's mom acted like nothing catastrophic had happened. She smoothed her hair, looked at herself in the mirror and said, "You're being dramatic. These things happen." That's when Brian rushed into the room, drawn by the yelling. He took one look at the dress on the floor and went pale. "What happened?" he asked. Before I could even finish my sentence, his mother jumped in. The dress was poorly made. It split when I barely touched it. Snap. "You squeezed into it after I told you not to." Brian looked back and forth between us, clearly overwhelmed. Then he turned to his mom and said something I didn't expect, but desperately needed to hear. "Mom, you're going to have to pay for a new dress. The wedding is only weeks away." For a brief moment I felt relief. Finally he was standing up for me. That moment didn't last. Her face hardened instantly. "Absolutely not," she said. "That's not my fault. If a wedding dress can't handle a little pressure, it's unreliable. You should be thanking me for finding out now instead of on the wedding day." Felt my jaw drop. "A little pressure," yelled. "You're 4 sizes bigger than me." Brian tried to reason with her. "Mom, it was tailored specifically for her. Of course it wouldn't fit you." She waved him off. "That's irrelevant. If something like that happened during the ceremony, everyone would have seen everything. I did you a favor." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I explained that the original tailor had a long wait list, and that there was no guarantee the dress could even be repaired in time. She didn't apologize. Not once. She didn't even look guilty. Instead, she accused me of overreacting. I demanded she pay for the damages. She refused again. At that point, I realized I wasn't getting anywhere. I grabbed my keys and walked out before I said something I couldn't take back. Brian stayed behind to talk to her, which only made me feel more alone. That night, memories I'd ignored for years started replaying in my head. When Brian and I first started dating, his mom made it clear she didn't like sharing him. She once told me, straight to my face, that she would always be the most important woman in his life. At the time, I brushed it off as a weird joke. Looking back, it wasn't a joke at all. She used to text him constantly when we were together, asking when he'd be home or calling just to gossip. It felt like she needed constant reassurance that she still had control over his attention. When I finally told Brian how uncomfortable it made me, he stepped in and set boundaries, at least temporarily. For a few years, things were manageable. She still crossed lines occasionally, but never like this. Destroying my wedding dress wasn't a mistake. It was a power move. The next morning, I went back to the bridal shop, praying I could find something that wouldn't need alterations. The stylist recognized me immediately and asked what brought me back so soon. I was too embarrassed to tell her the truth, so I lied and said my dog had destroyed the original dress. We searched for hours. Eventually, I found another dress. Simpler but still beautiful. It fit surprisingly well straight off the rack. Wasn't the dress I had dreamed about, but it would work. And at that point, I didn't have the luxury of perfection. I FaceTimed Brian to show him. He smiled and told me I looked stunning. Then I noticed his mom in the passenger seat beside him. She leaned into the frame and sighed dramatically. "I hope that one's more durable than the last," she said. "That first dress was clearly cheap." She said it on speaker, in front of the stylist. My face burned with embarrassment. I ended the call quickly and apologized to the stylist, who laughed and said she'd heard worse. Still, my hands were shaking as I paid. The dress was $1,500, significantly cheaper than the first. Brian sounded relieved when I told him the price. He even offered to pay for it himself, saying I shouldn't stress. But instead of feeling supported, I felt uneasy. Over the next few days, small arguments turned into bigger ones. Brian started defending his mom in subtle ways. He said things like, "She didn't mean to ruin it," and "It's just a dress, we already solved the problem." When I tried to explain that it wasn't about the dress, but about boundaries, he said he felt stuck in the middle. He told me he loved us both and wished we could all just get along. That was the first time I realized something terrifying. He didn't see her behavior as a serious problem. I thought the worst was over once I had a new dress, but the closer the wedding got, the more control his mother demanded. And Brian started letting her have it 2 weeks before the wedding, I thought things couldn't get any worse. I was wrong. At a small family dinner, Brian's mom brought up the dress again, completely unprompted. She asked where it was being kept, smiling in a way that made my stomach twist. "I'm not telling you," I said flatly. "I'd like to keep this one intact." The table went silent. Brian cleared his throat and said, "Come on, don't be petty." That was weeks ago. I stared at him, stunned. Petty. She destroyed my wedding dress. Before I could say anything else, his mom sighed dramatically and said, "You're trying to take the last thing in my life that makes me happy. My son, you should be grateful to have me involved at all." I was about to respond when the doorbell rang. It was my friend Emily. Brian had invited her without telling me because, as he later admitted, I seemed stressed lately. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief. The rest of the night was tolerable. We didn't talk about the dress again, and for a brief moment, things felt almost normal. The next day, that illusion shattered. I received a call from Brian's aunt, who I barely spoke to. She told me I needed to let the dress thing go, and stop making Brian's mom feel bad. She added that I knew his mom lived paycheck to paycheck, and that it was cruel of me to expect compensation. Then another relative called. And another. Some sided with me. Others told me I was being dramatic. When I told Brian about the calls, he shrugged and said, "Maybe my mom didn't mean to ruin it. And it's already handled, right? We have another dress." Every time he said that, it felt like a knife twisting deeper. As the wedding approached, he started spending less time with me. Whenever we were together, his mom would call or insist on stopping by. It felt like the early days of our relationship all over again, except this time, I wasn't pretending it didn't bother me. One afternoon we went to pick out flowers for my bouquet. I had been looking forward to it, imagining something soft and romantic. But when we arrived, Brian told me his mom was meeting us there. I immediately said no. "She doesn't have anyone else to go out with," he replied. "Just this once." Against my better judgment, I agreed. The florist showed me several arrangements, and I instantly fell in love with one. Champagne and blush flowers, subtle and elegant. My favorite colors. I asked Brian what he thought. "They look great," he said. Then his mom leaned forward. "Those colors are wrong for a wedding," she said. "You should do red roses. They symbolize passion." Before I could respond, Brian nodded. She has a point. I felt my heart sink. We ordered the red roses. On the drive home, Brian casually suggested that his mom should help more with planning since she clearly had good instincts. He said she had experience and just wanted to feel included. I stared out the window, speechless. The woman who ruined my dress wanted to help plan my wedding. When I finally spoke, my voice was shaking. "If you want her so involved, maybe you should marry her instead." He looked shocked and said I was being unfair. He claimed he was just trying to keep everyone happy. But every time I expressed discomfort, he painted me as the problem. I stopped arguing. I didn't have the energy anymore. The final week before the wedding was a blur of tension. One evening, his mom walked into our living room unannounced and started interrogating me about catering. When I told her we chose a local restaurant I grew up loving, she scoffed and said we should have gone with something classier. Then she criticized the venue, calling the neighborhood unsafe and embarrassing. She even referred to the entire wedding as low budget. I was boiling. As I tried to leave the room, she noticed the guest list on my laptop and told me I needed to cut it in half because her side of the family had more people. That was my breaking point. I told her if she hated everything so much, she didn't have to come. She rolled her eyes and called for Brian. When he came in, I explained everything. He listened quietly, then said, "She's just trying to help in the only way she knows how." I could hear the sincerity in his voice, and that hurt the most. His mom smirked. "Exactly. You should appreciate it." I walked upstairs and cried alone. Brian didn't come to check on me. That night, I fell asleep wondering when I had become the outsider in my own relationship. I thought I had hit rock bottom, but on the morning of the wedding I saw what his mother was wearing. And everything finally snapped. The morning of the wedding arrived, and instead of excitement, I felt numb. I went through the motions, hair, makeup, small talk with my bridesmaids, but none of it felt real. This was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life, yet it felt like I was acting in someone else's story. The dress I wore wasn't the one I had dreamed about. The flowers beside me weren't the colors I loved. And deep down, I wasn't even sure the man I was about to marry truly had my back. As my makeup artist finished the final touches, the door to the room opened. Brian's mother walked in. She was wearing an eggshell-colored dress. Not beige, not cream. Eggshell. Close enough to white that my heart dropped straight into my stomach. I stared at her, hoping I was mistaken. "What are you wearing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She smiled calmly, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. "It's tradition in our family to wear eggshell to our son's wedding." I stood up so fast my chair nearly fell over. "You can't wear that. This is my wedding day." I shrugged. "If you have a problem with it, talk to Brian. He's the one who took me shopping." That's when I knew. I marched down the hallway to the room where Brian was getting ready and told him he needed to tell his mother to change, or she wouldn't be attending the ceremony. His face immediately tightened. Before he could answer, his mom followed me in. "Well," she asked him. "Tell her." Brian hesitated. Then he said, "I think you're overreacting. It's eggshell, not white." I felt something inside me crack. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I turned around and walked back to my room, where I collapsed onto the bed and cried. My mascara ran. My makeup was ruined. No one followed me. As I tried to pull myself together, I heard voices through the slightly open door down the hall. "Brian and his mother," she said. "She's such a crybaby. Are you sure you want to marry someone like that?" There was a pause. Brian replied, "I love her." My chest tightened, until she continued. "When I was her age, I never cried over silly things. Real women don't lose it over dresses or cheap weddings." I held my breath, waiting for him to defend me. Instead he said, "Maybe you're right. The dress thing was a big deal to her, but we solved it. She just wouldn't let it go. And the wedding? I just wanted everyone to be happy." That was it. In that moment everything became clear. I wasn't his priority. I never had been. I opened the door and walked into the room. They both froze like they'd been caught doing something wrong. I looked directly at Brian and said calmly, "I'm not marrying you." His face went pale. "What?" "I won't spend my life with someone who lets his mother disrespect me and then blames me for reacting." His mom scoffed. "I knew this would happen." Brian chased after me as I grabbed my things. He promised he'd change. He said he'd set boundaries. He said we could fix this. For a split second I almost believed him. Then he added, "But you should also apologize to my mom for causing so much drama." That was the final straw. I laughed, a hollow, broken sound, and told him to lose my number. I walked out before the ceremony even began. Walking away shattered me. But what happened in the months after proved I made the only choice that would have saved my future. Walking out of the venue felt unreal, like I had stepped out of my own body and was watching someone else make the decision for me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my car. I sat there in my wedding dress, mascara streaked, heart pounding, trying to process the fact that I had just ended my engagement on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Behind me, chaos erupted. I could hear Brian calling my name, his voice cracking as he followed me outside. Guests were arriving, unaware that the wedding they were dressed up for was already over. His mother's voice carried behind him, sharp and irritated, saying something about how dramatic I was being. Brian caught up to me just as I started the engine. "Please," he said, standing in front of the car. "Don't do this. We can fix it. I'll talk to my mom. I promise." I looked at him and realized something painful. This wasn't the first time he'd said those words. He had promised to set boundaries when we first started dating. He promised again when she destroyed my dress. He promised during every argument where I felt pushed aside. And every time nothing changed. "I can't marry potential," I said quietly. "I need reality." He started crying, telling me he loved me and that he didn't want to lose me. Then, almost instinctively, he added, "But you don't have to cut my mom off. She's just sensitive." That's when I knew I was making the right decision. I drove away. The next few days were brutal. I returned the dress, cancelled vendors, and answered endless texts from confused friends and family. Some people supported me immediately. Others asked what I could have done differently, as if this was a misunderstanding instead of a pattern that had been repeating for years. Brian didn't stop trying. He called from unknown numbers. He sent long messages apologizing, then defending his mom, then apologizing again. His tone changed depending on the day. Loving one moment, resentful the next. At one point, he even suggested couples counseling, but only if his mom could explain her side too. I blocked him. A few weeks later, I heard through mutual friends that his mother was telling everyone I panicked, that I couldn't handle marriage, and that she had tried her best to help. Strangely enough, hearing that didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. Confirmed everything. Without the constant stress of walking on eggshells, my life slowly became quieter, lighter. I moved into a new apartment, redecorated in colors I loved, soft pinks and warm neutrals. I started therapy and unpacked years of self-doubt I hadn't even realized I was carrying. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Months passed. One evening, I found the photo of my original wedding dress buried in my phone. Instead of sadness, I felt gratitude. That dress didn't just rip. It revealed the truth before I legally tied myself to a lifetime of disrespect. I learned something important from all of this. Love isn't about how much someone says they care. It's about who they protect when things get uncomfortable. It's about boundaries being respected without arguments, excuses, or guilt. I didn't lose a wedding. I saved myself. Last I heard, Brian still lives with his mother. I don't feel angry about that anymore. I hope he figures out how to stand on his own someday. But I also know it won't be with me waiting around. As for me, life moved forward. I met new people. I laughed again. I learned that choosing myself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. And if I ever walk down the aisle again, it'll be with someone who sees me as his partner, not a problem. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't saying, "I do." It's knowing when to walk away.